Right now, 870 dispatcher positions sit unfilled across America's freight railroads. Six-figure pay, no college degree required, union protections, a role so critical that one wrong call can mean a derailment, a collision, or a dead crew. On paper, this should be one of the most sought-after careers in the country. In reality, railroads cannot keep people in the seat. Workers take the job and walk away from salaries most Americans would fight for, sometimes within months. This is not a hiring problem. It is a retention crisis, and to understand why, you need to know what really happens when a dispatcher sits down at that console. A train dispatcher works as an air traffic controller for the ground. But unlike aviation controllers who guide aircraft through three-dimensional space, a rail dispatcher manages heavy freight within a rigid, one-dimensional network. Trains cannot steer, cannot easily stop, and cannot bypass track failures on their own. From a centralized console, a single dispatcher governs a territory that can span from 12 miles of busy metropolitan corridor to more than 1,000 miles of empty single-track mainline. On a typical shift, over 100 trains, some weighing 20,000 tons and stretching 2 miles in length, will cross their digital screen. The dispatcher's job is to direct this massive, rolling puzzle in real time. They issue movement authorities, set track occupancy limits, and remotely control track switches to guide trains safely past each other. They must continually resolve conflicts under intense pressure, deciding which train holds the main line and which one must wait on a siding. In this environment, fluidity is required, but safety is absolute. There is no such thing as good enough. The extreme physics of freight transport mean a loaded train can take a mile or more to come to a complete stop. By the time a locomotive crew sees a hazard, it is often too late to prevent a disaster. They rely entirely on the dispatcher's screen to keep the line clear. A single routing error, a misplaced number on a track warrant, or a brief lapse in attention causes far more than a delay. It breaks the entire chain of safety, leading directly to catastrophic derailments and fatal collisions. Class 1 railroads market the train dispatcher position as a premier gateway to the American middle class. Recruitment listings advertise a career path where entry requires only a high school diploma, yet the compensation quickly rivals roles requiring advanced professional degrees. Norfolk Southern reports an average annual dispatcher salary of over $96,000, and union-backed contracts regularly elevate total compensation packages beyond $73 an hour with overtime and bonuses. For an ambitious job seeker, the role offers an immediate stake in the nation's economic engine. Dispatchers coordinate the massive supply chains that feed cities and power factories across thousands of miles of mainline track. This combination of six-figure earning potential, solid healthcare benefits, and a clear sense of civic purpose makes the position highly competitive in the labor market. From the outside, it represents a stable, prestigious path to financial security, a rare opportunity where authority, respect, and compensation align perfectly. Yet across the country, the consoles governing these critical rail corridors are frequently empty. On any given day, public job boards show approximately 870 open dispatcher listings nationwide. These advertisements for Class 1 carriers remain active for months at a time, continuously seeking applicants to fill the gaps in a depleted network. This vacancy rate reflects a deep structural breakdown. Since 2017, major railroads have thinned their operational workforces, leaving fewer dispatchers to manage increasingly complex territories. Labor unions representing these workers argue that the core issue has nothing to do with recruitment. The railroads find candidates easily, but keeping those people in the seats is the real struggle. New hires enter the dispatch centers attracted by the six-figure potential, only to face an operational reality that many find unsustainable. A former dispatcher who recently resigned from a major carrier described how quickly the appeal faded. "The training is intense, and the money is real," he explained. "But they don't tell you that you are trading your entire personal life for it." You sit down at that console, the weight of the entire system falls on you, and you realize the paycheck cannot buy back your health or your family. I watched people quit during their first solo week. This high attrition turns a simple labor shortage into a retention crisis. The advertised value of the role fails to match the actual, lived cost of the work. Workers are actively choosing to walk away from secure, union-backed careers. To understand why a highly paid profession has become a job to escape, it is necessary to look past the recruiting advertisements and examine the daily conditions of the dispatch floor. The disruption begins with the clock. A standard railroad dispatching operation never closes, which means the workforce is bound to a relentless cycle of 8-hour rotating shifts. Unlike industries where employees work a set schedule, a rail dispatcher might work mornings for a stretch, flip to afternoon shifts, and then find themselves assigned to the deep night. Because the rail network operates every single day of the year, weekends, birthdays, and holidays are treated merely as regular calendar days. The job demands constant presence, effectively turning personal time into a secondary consideration. This constant shifting of working hours creates what sleep scientists call chronic circadian disruption. According to Federal Railroad Administration research into dispatcher daily logs, the average dispatcher gets just 5.8 hours of sleep on workdays, well below the 7 to 9 hours recommended for healthy cognitive function. When sleep is cut short and constantly moved around, it ceases to be a private, restorative period. Instead, sleep becomes a tactical challenge that must be carefully planned, forced, and defended against the noise of a world that operates on a completely different rhythm. The impact of this schedule extends far beyond simple tiredness. It actively dismantles the structures of a normal life. A former dispatcher from BNSF described the daily friction of trying to maintain relationships under these conditions. "You become a ghost in your own home," he recalled. "You are sleeping when your spouse is awake, and you are driving to a shift when your kids are coming home from school. You cannot RSVP to a dinner, you cannot commit to a weekend trip, and you cannot even establish a regular mealtime." The job ultimately dictates the family's rhythm, forcing household routines to adjust to the erratic demands of the console. This constant unpredictability turns a highly compensated career into an isolating experience. Long before a worker faces the physical toll of burnout or the pressure of a critical emergency, the daily schedule has already eroded their connection to the world outside the dispatch center. The six-figure salary begins to look less like an achievement and more like a transaction, where the currency is time itself. Sitting in front of a bank of glowing monitors, a dispatcher handles an average of 120 conflict events during an 8-hour shift. That is a decision every 4 minutes, each one demanding absolute precision. The track layout is an interlocking puzzle, and the rules governing it are rigid. When two trains are traveling toward each other on a single track line, the dispatcher must decide which one to divert and exactly when to throw the switch. A delay of 30 seconds can disrupt freight traffic across 3 states. A single incorrect digit typed into a track authority can send 20,000 tons of steel into a head-on collision. This is the pressure cooker reality of the console, where the line between normal operations and catastrophe is razor thin. Unlike almost any other profession, dispatching allows zero margin for error. There is no edit button, no recall on a transmission, and no such thing as good enough. If an accountant makes a mistake, a spreadsheet is corrected. If a dispatcher makes a mistake, lives are lost. Federal investigators have repeatedly documented the consequences when this system of absolute attention breaks down. In its investigation of a December 2021 Norfolk Southern roadway worker fatality in North Carolina, designated as Report RIR 2314, the National Transportation Safety Board identified serious safety shortcomings. The inquiry revealed how easily a breakdown in communication and a brief lapse in situational awareness can turn fatal. When a dispatcher fails to establish proper blocking authority to protect a work zone, wayside signals remain green, routing trains directly into the path of unsuspecting crews. You are holding lives in your hands, and you feel that weight every second, explains one former dispatcher. The screen is constantly screaming for attention. You have maintenance crews asking for track time, yardmasters demanding routes, and high-priority trains that cannot be delayed. You are playing a high-stakes game of chess where you cannot see the board, only lights on a screen. Safety experts point out that the human brain cannot maintain this level of hypervigilance under chronic sleep deprivation. Cognitive fatigue impairs reaction time and working memory. A tired dispatcher experiences mental tunnel vision, failing to notice safety conflicts until it is too late to intervene. Safety is built entirely on active attention, but the schedule constantly erodes the very faculty required to keep trains apart. When the console demands absolute perfection, but the body is starved of rest, the margin of safety vanishes in an instant. In 2017, the financial strategy known as Precision Scheduled Railroading, or PSR, began reshaping North American freight operations. Designed to simplify the network, run longer trains, and tighten schedules, PSR focused on boosting asset use while systematically reducing equipment and labor. Under this model, Class 1 railroads treated workforce reductions as a primary metric of corporate cost-cutting. Since the rollout of PSR, major railroads have eliminated more than 22% of their total workforce. CSX cut 3,700 jobs as part of its transition, while Union Pacific eliminated 500 payroll positions and 200 contract positions in a single year to lower its operating costs. These sweeping workforce reductions were not limited to track maintenance or train crews. They directly impacted the regional dispatch offices. As employee headcounts fell, railroads consolidated physical dispatch centers, closing smaller regional offices and merging multiple territories into single, centralized facilities. For the remaining dispatchers, this meant a dramatic expansion of the physical territory they had to monitor. A single console that once managed a defined metropolitan corridor or a couple hundred miles of track was suddenly merged with adjacent zones, forcing dispatchers to absorb a massive increase in territory load. From a business standpoint, this consolidation represents the logical streamlining of a complex network. Railroad executives argue that modern scheduling software and streamlined operating models allow a leaner workforce to manage the system with greater precision. They point to improved asset velocity and lower operational overhead as proof that the network can run smoothly with fewer hands. In public statements, carriers like CSX reported strong progress in converting to this model, revising traditional service metrics such as train velocity and terminal dwell to align with the leaner operating structure. But rail unions and safety advocates view this lean operating model as a system pushed past its structural limits. They argue that dispatchers have become downstream casualties of aggressive operating targets. When territories double or triple in size, the workload on the individual dispatcher increases exponentially. Instead of monitoring a familiar stretch of track, a single dispatcher must now track wayside signals, maintenance crews, and multiple massive trains across hundreds of miles of unfamiliar territory. This structural shift fundamentally altered the nature of dispatching. The workload grew heavier because the rail network itself was redesigned to operate with the absolute bare minimum of human oversight. By treating labor as a cost to be minimized rather than a safety buffer to be maintained, the adoption of precision-scheduled railroading set the stage for a system where a single worker is expected to hold a sprawling, high-stakes network together. When a railroad consolidates its dispatching offices and cuts its workforce, the physical consoles governing the tracks do not go away. The trains still run, the signals still require human oversight, and the empty seats must be covered. To bridge this gap, railroads rely on a mechanism that turns understaffing into a permanent operating rule: mandatory overtime. This reliance is encoded directly into the labor agreements. Under Rule 29 of the SMART-TD National Collective Bargaining Agreement, overtime triggers apply after 8 hours of work on runs of 100 miles or less. While these rules were originally negotiated to protect workers from excessive duty and establish clear boundaries, severe staffing shortages have inverted their function. Instead of serving as a financial penalty to discourage overworking employees, the premium pay structure has become the default mechanism for keeping the dispatch floor active. Federal records reveal the scope of this reliance. Dispatcher shift logs released under the Freedom of Information Act from 2023 through 2026 show that the standard 40-hour workweek has effectively disappeared for much of the workforce, with active dispatchers routinely logging 45 to 55 hours per week. Union grievance filings describe an environment where mandatory extra shifts have been normalized. Sourced grievance language from SMART-TD representatives condemns the widespread use of forced drafts, a practice where dispatchers are ordered to remain at their consoles for back-to-back shifts with little to no prior notice. This system places the burden of the industry's labor shortage squarely on the shoulders of the remaining employees. Because a dispatcher cannot simply walk away from an active rail corridor without a relief operator in place, they are trapped at their desks, absorbing the vacancy rate hour by hour. This creates a destructive feedback loop. The extra hours generate time-and-a-half premium pay, which inflates the high compensation advertised in recruiting brochures. But the financial gain comes at the cost of inescapable physical fatigue. As the forced overtime continues, the pressure mounts, and the attrition rate climbs. Dispatchers reaching their breaking point choose to leave the industry, walking away from their pensions and seniorities. But when a worker quits, their territory does not vanish. It is divided among those who stay. The remaining dispatchers must work even more mandatory shifts to cover the new vacancy, accelerating their own path toward burnout. This is the self-feeding cycle of the modern dispatch office. Understaffing forces mandatory overtime. Mandatory overtime drives attrition, and attrition deepens the shortage, leaving a shrinking group of workers to manage a sprawling national network. The immediate corporate response to a labor shortage is to hire more people. But a railroad dispatch console is not a plug-and-play position. You cannot simply recruit an applicant off the street and seat them at a desk. The path to independent solo work takes between 2 and 3 years of intensive training. This long pipeline is a regulatory and safety necessity because on a rail network, a rookie's mistake is too expensive to permit. The learning curve is steep, demanding total mastery of federal safety rules, physical track layouts, and complex signaling systems. This knowledge is not absorbed from a manual. It is passed down through hands-on, supervised practice. But here, the railroads run into a structural wall, the mentorship bottleneck. Under Federal Railroad Administration guidelines, a trainer must hold at least 2 years of certified dispatcher experience. Because veteran dispatchers are leaving the industry or are already overwhelmed by their own consoles, the pool of qualified mentors has shriveled. This scarcity of experienced trainers directly slows any hope of recovery. To make matters more difficult, new federal certification rules, under 49 CFR Part 245, require all Class I railroads to submit formal, standardized testing and training programs for FRA approval by September 17, 2026. This regulatory checkpoint forces carriers to build highly structured curricula from scratch, even as their veteran workforce exits. The result is a self-perpetuating lag. You cannot train new dispatchers without veterans, but you cannot free up veterans to train because they are desperately needed to keep the active consoles running. A trainee must memorize every signal, every speed restriction, and every physical switch on their territory before they are allowed to issue a single movement authority on their own. In an industry starved of experience, this training wall ensures that help is not on the way anytime soon. With the training pipeline choked, industry observers often point to technology as the ultimate solution. The railroads have already spent heavily on this promise. By December 2020, carriers fully implemented positive train control across 57,000 miles of track, a safety system that cost $14 billion to deploy. Today, Class 1 railroads are piloting PTC 2.0 systems, testing artificial intelligence for collision avoidance and automated grade crossings. But these digital tools are not designed to replace the human dispatcher. A rail software engineer involved in these projects points out that modern software is built to assist, not to decide. While algorithms can optimize train paths, they cannot manage the unpredictable nature of track maintenance, weather disruptions, or mechanical failures. A skeptical automation researcher agrees, noting that artificial intelligence excels in closed environments, but struggles with the messy reality of mixed traffic routes, where passenger and freight trains share the same rails. The physical infrastructure itself presents a massive barrier to automation. Much of the American rail network still relies on legacy, relay-based interlocking systems designed decades ago. These analog setups lack software interfaces, and their undocumented wiring makes digital retrofits highly complex. Even where digital controls exist, interoperability remains an issue. Different major railroads operate incompatible, proprietary dispatch systems. Without a single, unified national protocol, these systems cannot reliably communicate across territorial boundaries. Finally, the financial and legal realities keep full replacement remote. The upfront capital required to digitize every switch and signal is prohibitive. And the liability of a software-induced collision is a risk corporate boards are unwilling to take. The Federal Railroad Administration can issue a $16,000 civil penalty for safety system violations. Until technology can assume absolute legal liability for train routing, human dispatchers must remain at the consoles, holding the network together. When a human body is kept in a state of constant low-level emergency, it begins to break down. For train dispatchers, the physiological bill for years of rotating shifts and decision pressure eventually comes due. It is no longer just a matter of feeling tired after a long shift. The fatigue becomes structural, altering the body's chemistry and wearing down basic bodily systems. Federal Railroad Administration research into dispatcher workload directly links this sustained operational stress to chronic clinical conditions, including severe hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and permanent sleep disorders. Sleep specialists studying high-stress transportation roles point to the biological damage of constant circadian misalignment. When sleep is consistently restricted and interrupted, the brain is deprived of the essential restorative phases required to clear toxins and regulate blood pressure. Over time, this chronic deprivation increases the risk of long-term cognitive decline and leaves the nervous system locked in a permanent fight-or-flight state. This physical degradation does not stay confined to the dispatch center. The burden follows workers home, where families and partners absorb the collateral damage of a broken schedule. Spouses describe a home life defined by tiptoeing around erratic sleep hours, missed milestone events, and an underlying tension that never truly dissipates. The mental weight of holding hundreds of lives on a single console creates an invisible wall, making it incredibly difficult for dispatchers to mentally unplug or engage with their loved ones, even when they are physically present. The job demands absolute perfection during the shift. But the human cost of that perfection is paid in damaged hearts, strained marriages, and a quiet, accumulating exhaustion that no paycheck can fix. Ultimately, the body keeps a precise tally of the hours stolen from it, and for many dispatchers, the cost of staying in the chair is simply too high to bear. A compensation package of $73 an hour looks like a victory on paper. Under smart TD contracts, these premium rates represent the financial yield of relentless, forced overtime rather than a high base wage. The math of the dispatch floor reveals a stark imbalance. Cash cannot pay off a chronic sleep debt, nor can it restore missed holidays, birthdays, or daily conversations with family. The constant pressure of managing a sprawling rail network, where a single split-second mistake can lead to a catastrophic collision, imposes a psychological tax that no bonus can offset. When experienced dispatchers walk away from secure, high-paying careers, they are making a calculated choice. They have measured the paycheck against their own longevity and realized that the railroad is asking to buy what is not for sale. On the modern rail network, a well-paid job has become an unsustainable life, proving that some debts simply cannot be settled in cash. Surface Transportation Board hearings laid bare a severe national service crisis, with testimony pointing directly to empty consoles. Yet federal oversight remains structurally toothless. The Federal Railroad Administration mandates no explicit minimum staffing standards for dispatchers. Instead, temporary reporting extensions, stretched out to late 2024, keep necessary workforce data incomplete and leave regulators operating in the dark. This is not a recruiting problem. It is a self-made operational crisis built through decades of aggressive cost-cutting. The industry has consistently prioritized short-term cost savings over system resilience. A clear menu of reforms already exists: establishing strict dispatcher staffing ratios, mandating predictable schedules, providing active mental health support, investing heavily in the training pipeline, and deploying limited, assistive automation. But pursuing these changes requires Class 1 carriers to accept a hard truth. A fragile dispatch workforce systematically weakens the entire freight network. Safety and reliability are tied to staffing, not just machinery. Technology cannot compensate for human exhaustion. Every empty seat on the dispatch floor erodes the network's margin for error, proving that the resilience of the rails depends entirely on the stability of the people who run them. Today, the AIR traffic control of the ground operates on a razor's edge of chronic exhaustion. As freight lines push fewer workers to manage larger, heavier trains, a single mental lapse threatens the spine of our national supply chain. This crisis is no longer just about empty desks. It is a countdown for public safety. Will the industry break its self-feeding death loop in time, or will it take a catastrophic failure to force real reform? Share your thoughts below.